Hi guys, welcome to my video about queerness and queer identity. I asked a bunch of you to send in questions and we got a lot that are really great. Today, my great assistant Elisa behind the camera is going to read them out in some semblance of an order, and I'm going to try and answer them to the best of my ability. So first question, what is queer? Queer is an umbrella term used by the LGBT plus community to refer to everyone under the spectrum, whether you're gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, or anything else, because there's as many identities as there are people. The important thing is to recognize that it refers to people who aren't straight, or heterosexual, and or cisgender, which means that they don't feel that their gender identity aligns with the sex they were assigned at birth.
Is it okay to use the term queer? I'm hesitant to say queer because somebody back at university told me not to use it because it hasn't been fully reclaimed yet. Like, I know it was a slur for a long time.
So that's a really good question and really relevant right now. A lot of people don't want to offend, but they honestly aren't sure the best way to refer to queer people. Obviously, I use the term queer and I'm going to explain why. So if you're my age, mid-20s or even early 30s, you probably haven't heard queer actually be used as a slur a lot. You've just heard the history of queer being used as a slur. Nowadays, most people use "that's so gay" as a slur way more often, but of course, everyone talks about gay people and gay pride and gay rights. Why is queer considered a slur if gay isn't? The answer goes back to who people want to be included in the LGBT community or not. There are some people who think that only lesbians, gays, bisexuals, and trans people should be included in the queer community. There's other people who want room for people who are questioning, people who are asexual, people who are non-binary, and all the other queer identities that exist in the spectrum. I think it's really important to use the term queer because it allows people a lot of freedom in how they identify. For example, if you identify as more than one of the identities in the umbrella, like if you're bisexual and transgender, you don't necessarily have to tell somebody your entire identity. You can just say you're queer. Sometimes, especially if you're one of the more marginalized groups within the queer community, that can actually be a lot safer than saying you're transgender or bisexual or whatever you are.
The LGBTQIP2SAA initialism has gotten kind of unwieldy, and saying the whole thing makes me feel like I'm mocking the concept, which I'm not. But using some shorter version, like just LGBT, runs the risk of coming off like adding your letters to my initialism is just too much work for me.
You've probably or possibly heard a lot of acronyms related to the queer community. There's LGBT, LGBT+, LGBTQ, alphabet soup, quilt bag, GLBT, LGB, and all of these other things, including the really long one that Elisa just read out. I'm going to say, as a queer person, I don't expect anyone to memorize the really, really long version. I don't think it's necessary to list all of the identities in a casual conversation. It does take a long time, it's hard to say, and you run the risk of messing it up. Also, there's still some controversy about what should be included in the acronym and what shouldn't. So the best route to go, I would say, is either say LGBT+, LGBTQ, or queer. So we're going to go over the long initialism that Elisa read out one by one so you know what each identity stands for. L stands for lesbian, G stands for gay, B stands for bisexual, T stands for transgender. It can also include people who are non-binary, agender, gender fluid, gender queer. It essentially stands for anyone who doesn't fit into the cis-binary system. The first Q stands for questioning, which means someone who doesn't necessarily know their identity yet, but they know they're not straight or cisgender, or they know their identity and they don't want to be put into any singular label. The second Q stands for queer. I stands for intersex, which is a condition where people don't have dyadic genitalia. The P stands for pansexual, which is not dissimilar to bisexual. Some people identify with both, some people really identify with one over the other. If you want to know the definitions, it's always best to ask the person who identifies as bisexual or pansexual or both. 2S is really interesting. 2S stands for two-spirited, which is an exclusively Native American gender identity. The first A stands for asexual, aromantic, or anything in the A spectrum. The second A stands for ally. Here's where it gets controversial. A lot of people say that allies shouldn't be included under the queer umbrella, which to me makes a lot of sense. They don't experience the same discrimination, the same stereotyping, the same social pressures that queer people do, even though it is not an easy job to be a good ally. That's one of the other reasons that I recommend not to actually say the whole initialism, because you never know the politics of the person you're talking to. You never know if they want, for example, 2 Qs in it or 2 As in it. It's always best to ask the person what they believe.
I've noticed that there isn't very much mentioned about cross-dressing in reputable sources on the web. It would be very cool to have another source that answers some basic questions about cross-dressing that people may have.
So cross-dressing is not inherently queer, but there's definitely a lot of overlap with queer culture in the queer community. The act of cross-dressing is simply the act of wearing clothing and acting in a manner that's associated with the opposite binary sex to you within your society. For example, as someone who was assigned female at birth in Western society, if I wear a 3-piece suit and hold a briefcase and put on a mustache, I'll be coded as masculine and looking like a man. So for me, that's cross-dressing. Another example, a male in my society who wears a skirt can be coded as cross-dressing, but a male in, say, Scotland who wears a kilt will still be considered wearing masculine clothing. It's important to recognize how culturally relevant cross-dressing is. It's not anything that's universal, and it entirely depends on what your society defines as feminine and masculine. Overall, the act is just playing with your gender identity.
How is cross-dressing different from transitioning?
Cross-dressing is temporary. When you cross-dress, you're exploring another gender, but it doesn't mean that you identify as that gender. People might cross-dress on Halloween, or cross-dress for acting in a theater play. At the end of the day, when they take those clothes off, they still identify as the gender they began identifying with. Transitioning is when a trans person goes either physically or emotionally from identifying as one gender to a different gender. For example, someone who's trans and was assigned female at birth might transition into presenting like a man. This may mean they get sexual reassignment surgery, or it may mean they just choose to start wearing suits, like I said before. It always depends on the individual. So it's not the same as cross-dressing, it's much more permanent and it's much more of a lifestyle choice.
How is cross-dressing different from drag?
Cross-dressing and drag, there's a ton of overlap. They're not necessarily different. Drag refers to a very specific culture. In America, which is the drag community that I know the best about, you'll usually see things like RuPaul's Drag Show, or see drag shows in clubs in which male performers dress up as women and over-exaggerate the way that women act. They have really intense makeup, really big wigs, really high heels, and they perform. It's a performance. Drag culture is about embracing that performance that's evolved over time in a very specific way. There's very specific mannerisms associated with drag culture. Cross-dressing is more open. You could say that drag is a subset of cross-dressing, though.
Why do people cross-dress?
People can cross-dress for any reason. Sometimes it's just fun. For example, a lot of people when they were kids raided their parents' closet. Cross-dressing is just a way to explore a different side of you and maybe find out more about what you like to wear.
Do straight people and/or binary people cross-dress?
Everyone can cross-dress. It doesn't matter what your gender is, it doesn't matter what your sex is, it doesn't matter what your culture is. As long as you have multiple genders in your culture, you can always dress as a different gender from yourself.
Why do some people say same-sex marriage instead of gay marriage?
So that's a really good question. Gay marriage exclusively refers to, say, lesbians getting married or gay men getting married. But realistically, a lot of people who marry same-sex partners aren't actually lesbians and they aren't actually gay men. For example, you could be bisexual and marry someone of the same gender as you. So the importance of saying same-sex marriage is to recognize that there's all sorts of people under the spectrum of queerness that weren't previously recognized by the term gay marriage.
How are gender and sex different?
It's a big one. So that's a really good question, and there's a much deeper answer, but for now I'm going to go with the 101, and maybe write in the description down below a little more about what I think. The 101 thing that you hear, gender is what you identify as, for example, male or female, or something in between, or something totally different. Sex is what your body is, your genitalia, your secondary sex characteristics, and your chromosomes. However, it's important to recognize that there's actually different chromosomal conditions that don't align with what we consider to be male or female, and what we consider to be clear genitalia, such as vaginas, penises, things like that, actually exists on a spectrum as well, which is part of the condition called intersex. While sex we say is biological and gender is a social construct, it's really all social and all biological in different ways. There's no proof necessarily for whether sex is inherent to us or gender is inherent to us.
How does being on the ace spectrum relate to one's identity as gay, bi, etc.?
First of all, let's define asexuality. Asexuality is a spectrum going from what some people call allosexual to demisexual to graysexual to asexual. It refers to how sexually attracted somebody feels to someone. Asexuality refers to people who don't necessarily feel sexual attraction. It doesn't have to do with how much they love them, because there's lots of different types of love and lots of different types of attraction. How does being asexual relate to identifying as bisexual, transgender, gay, whatever? First of all, asexuality is a sexual orientation. It has nothing to do with gender orientation. You can identify as cisgender, transgender, genderqueer, gender fluid, all those fun things, and it will not affect your sexual orientation. And that includes being gay, being bisexual, being pansexual, being asexual, whatever. So there's a new model which has come out recently in queer theory, which talks about how there's different types of attraction. There's romantic attraction, emotional attraction, sexual attraction, sensual attraction, intellectual attraction. There's basically a lot of ways that we can all love each other. People who are asexual might not necessarily feel sexual attraction, but they can still feel romantic attraction towards anybody. For example, you could have someone who identifies as biromantic, asexual, which means that they feel romantic feelings towards people of any gender, or more than 2 genders, but they don't necessarily feel sexually attracted to those genders. That's all the questions we have for now. If this made you think of more questions, please comment below or send me a message. Don't worry about being ignorant or sounding offensive or sounding silly, because we all start out learning about this from square one, including me. And thank you so much for everyone who sent in messages this time. Have a great day, guys, and stay queer. Ooh, that's hard.
Is that too big for this video?
No, we'll try it. Just gotta think of a good way to put it. We're gonna go over the long initialism. Initialism?
That's what this was written.
Okay.
What is cross-dressing?
Wait, ask it again.
Oh. What is cross-dressing?
So...
Do you think you have to explain what ace is?
Yes, I do. But could you give me, like, a good definition?